The Trumpet Daily program begins right now.
Today's world news, what it means, where it's taking us.
I bring you the one and only possible message of world peace.
This is a message of hope, tremendous hope. And he said unto me, you must prophesy again.
The Trumpet Daily program begins right now.
A short time ago, Russian President Vladimir Putin was asked if he is worried that the world could be heading toward World War III in this situation. Here's what he said.
It is disturbing. I am speaking without any irony, without any jokes. Of course, there is a lot of conflict potential. It is growing, and it is right under our noses, and it affects us directly. And this requires, of course, not only our careful attention to the events taking place, but also the search for solutions. The search for solutions, preferably by peaceful means.
It is as if it's from another world when we see Russia's war of aggression on Ukraine, the barbaric attack of Hamas on Israel, and the Iranian regime of terror and its nuclear weapon program targeting Israel. But these events are the new normal in the world in which we live. We need to look at what's happening, and we need to learn from these crimes. We must take a stance against them. We must draw the right conclusions from this new reality, because that's the only way we will be able to have liberty, freedom in Germany and in Europe, because the geopolitical turbulence that we are seeing in the world don't just impact on Germany indirectly. We are dealing with a new reality here, one that impacts on our liberty, on our security, on our prosperity directly. And as the Federal Republic of Germany, we must assert our interests in this new reality actively and directly. And the geopolitical situation we live in is one we need to shape as best we can.
Such troubling news that we see happening every day. Some of these world leaders of the most prominent nations on the planet are sounding alarm. And in many ways, it could be very frightening. There's growing conflict that's affecting Russia, as Mr. Putin says, and talked about searching for solutions. Just to summarize a few of his statements, searching for solutions, hopefully, or preferably by peaceful means. And it's interesting watching him because he's pretty good at coming off as innocent, as somebody that, is maybe trustworthy or seeking the peaceful means. And yet, ironically, he is the aggressor. And then as you watch Germany rise, as you see on the screen there with the Prime Minister Friedrich Merz delivering a presentation about the new normal, a new reality. This is our world today. This is what our children can expect. And he was talking about, Germany needs to take a stance against these crimes. Germany needs to draw the right conclusions from this new reality. And you translate that, and obviously they want to take advantage of the changing tide. There is a lot of unrest in this world. He spoke about freedom for Germany and Europe, but he didn't say anything about the rest of the world. It was just freedom and prosperity for Germany and Europe. That's not too terribly unexpected in this current world. Obviously, everybody looks out for their own. But it's interesting to think of, Vladimir Putin's perspective, Benjamin Netanyahu's perspective, perspective from the Canadians, the Americans. It doesn't matter where you look. Everybody wants to shape the narrative. So who is going to shape that narrative? Can we even know? Well, obviously, yes, we can, because of Bible prophecy. Prophecy spells it out for us. I'd like to welcome you to the Trumpet Daily program. Mr. Stephen Fleury has safely arrived in the United Kingdom, and he has a very busy schedule ahead for the next week or two. We'll have some terrific programs coming, I'm sure, from Britain and hopefully from down in Israel. But today, I'm your host. My name is Andrew Loker. I was kind of struck the other day. Mr. Stephen Fleury was saying, I think he was talking to Sam about just the pace and the volume of world events. It is amazing what is taking place. It has never been this dangerous. I just was looking at the news here just a few minutes ago. Just a couple headlines for you. This is from Reuters this morning. Pope Leo laments the diabolical intensity of the Middle East conflict. Interesting selection of words there. He said today, this is Pope Leo, today violent conflict seems to be raging with a diabolical intensity previously unknown. I think he's right. I think he's right. Another article from today. This is, let's see, I didn't write down the source. Sorry about that. But the title is Survey Shows Surge in Support for U.S. Leadership in Foreign Affairs. And this was actually, I believe, from defensenews.com. It says a new national survey shows nearly 2/3 of Americans want U.S. leaders to take a larger role in international engagement and foreign affairs, a sharp increase from the number of respondents who expressed that desire just 2 years ago. They were basically saying that there's a 10% increase in the last 2 years of the American public that wants to see the U.S. more engaged in the geopolitical fightings around this world and the economic dealings. There is, talk of isolationism or America first, and yet the public wants to see more. This says 93% of Republicans surveyed expressed a belief that a strong U.S. military is essential for peace and prosperity. It's kind of ironic, and yet it's true in today's world. You need a strong military if you want to enforce peace. That's fine as long as you're the aggressor and you're winning, as you're successful. But there's obviously the other party that would like the same, outcome. This also says it's not just the Republicans, quoting back now, 80% of Democrats polled believe that America needs to stand up for human rights and democracy overseas, compared to 81% of Republicans. And so the Democrats are even calling for more engagement. Lastly, from this morning's Trumpet brief, Mr. Richard Palmer, the main article there is Daddy's Still Behind NATO. Just quoting some of the news report earlier this morning. I'm presuming it's the same as the Trumpet brief, but it says U.S. President Donald Trump left the NATO summit yesterday more supportive of the alliance than ever. It's ironic how just unpredictable this world is. We're against NATO, we're for NATO, we're at fighting odds with them, and then before you know it, they're treating us like a king. And they're balking at commitments financially, and then they're embracing them. Really interesting to watch that going on. Mr. Palmer says, this is quoting Mr. Trump, speaking of the NATO summit. He said it was a fairly long trip, but worth it. Tremendous things have been accomplished. A little further down, he says, almost every one of them said, thank God for America or for the United States. Without the United States, we couldn't have NATO. Do you think they really embrace the United States, our role, our authority in NATO? I don't think so. They say he concluded that NATO is, quote, not a ripoff, and we're here to help them. Again, quoting Donald Trump. And then he just talks. And again, I encourage you to read the Trumpet brief, to write in. If you're not subscribed to that, you can do that on thetrumpet.com. He says, following through is the hardest part. This is Mr. Palmer. Germany is the only major economy on course to carry that out. Their defense spending has more than doubled over the last decade. That's really significant. And they're planning on almost doubling it again. What is going on with this world? He, in the news report, he quotes Foreign Affairs. It says, but before American officials pat themselves on the back or take a victory lap, they must understand the downside of their success. Growing European power means the era of comfortable U.S. leadership is over. Europe will feel less pressure to defer to Washington's interests. Again, just so much in the news that we need to pay attention to. This program, our work, specializes on focusing first and building everything off Bible prophecy. The Old Testament prophet Daniel was given geopolitical prophecy for this end time. We quote him probably more often than just about anybody. And there's a good reason for that. Daniel helps us set benchmarks for where we are today in relation to the return of Jesus Christ. He was a really unique man. He was, exposed to some very troubling visions that God showed him, a level of evil, a level of destruction and military might that was obviously uncommon in his day. End time prophecy, it made him sick. And it left him with a lot of questions. And he wanted to understand, but his instructions were to write it down and that God would seal it until the time we're living in right now. And so you see us focusing a lot on what Daniel had to say. We talk a lot about the Daniel 8 man, right? He's the prophesied leader over the final resurrection of the Holy Roman Empire. And again, we speak of him often. We have a tremendous booklet about him. This is the booklet, sorry, the title just escaped me. A Strong German Leader is Imminent, right? He is right there ready to come out. And that booklet shares with you who we're watching. Who we're watching. It's most likely not Friedrich Merz. There are strong indications of who he actually is. And we know that he will be launched onto the world scene. He will start to shape the world moving forward. We'll talk a little bit more about him in the second half if there's time. What's interesting to me about him and others, as I'll mention here in just a moment, this Daniel 8 man that leads this resurrected Holy Roman Empire, he doesn't start out with these ambitions that he'll finish with. He has to have a mind change. He doesn't believe he's capable of such evil. And the Pope talks about the unprecedented evil that we're seeing, and we are seeing it. The October 7th massacre, some of the just horrendous things that are going on with child trafficking, drug addiction, economic exploitation. You could go through 1,000 different subjects and see evil on an unprecedented level. Vladimir Putin, as I mentioned earlier, seems pretty innocent, almost seems likable. He probably is not sincere at all. I don't think he is, right? But does he really understand where all of this is leading, his ambitions? Is he prepared to perhaps contribute to the loss of millions and billions of lives? President Donald Trump comes into the mix, of course. He's very prominently displayed on the news. He just declared peace, right? He helped bring some peace about as this world sees it. He speaks with a lot of hope. He has tremendous confidence, I think oftentimes overstated or misplaced. He too seems sincere, and yet occasionally you see that sincerity buckle. My point is, we're dealing with problems that are far bigger than one man or one nation. I think it's in Ephesians 6 where it talks about we're wrestling against spiritual wickedness in high places. That's why it's unprecedented. We're seeing spiritual wickedness play out in the affairs of man. God is in control of everything. We don't have to worry. The lesson he wants mankind to learn is contained in every bit of our literature. It's part of every program. God wants mankind to learn that mankind cannot rule himself. Can't rule man. Only God can do that. And what's really interesting to me, and I'll just allude to a prophecy at the end of today's program to cause you hopefully to study into this subject more on your own, but the path that God uses to bring about peace and prosperity is likely not what you would expect. That's why we have to be students of Bible prophecy. That's why you have to watch programs like this. We have to watch, smartly. We have to be intellectual in our analysis. We have to yield to God's Holy Spirit if we're really going to know what's happening, what's taking place around us. Another interesting fact is that God typically, doesn't use prophecy to discuss a lot of secular leaders. If you read through the Bible, you read a lot about Moses or a prophet, You do read about kings over Judah or Israel in the end time, or sorry, in the Old Testament. But it's kind of rare to find prophecies about end time leaders that's not, it is easy to find reference to leaders in this end time that are secular in nature. These are the prophetic last days. I'll give you a couple examples of that. Sorry, I stumbled there a little bit. Winston Churchill. We have a great booklet on him, The Watchman. Winston Churchill is prophesied about a lot in the book of Ezekiel. We reference his leadership that God used to preserve the Western world, to fight against Nazi aggression, to prevent the annihilation of humanity on this planet. I'll just remind you, if you'd like any of these books or booklets, we encourage you to write in for them. They're free of charge. It really does make a difference. You can, of course, download them off our website, thetrumpet.com, under the literature tab. If you find it easier, you can email us, td@thetrumpet.com, and just tell us what you'd like. Or if you'd like to call in and speak with one of our operators and ask them for the literature, you can call 866-930-3024. So we have Winston Churchill prophesied about directly in the Bible to appear, as we lead up to these last days, America under attack. This was obviously really a huge focus for us in the past several months, still tremendously relevant. If you don't have a copy, get a copy. It's free of charge. It's a hardback book. It's really just fascinating. Prophecies in there regarding Jeroboam or Donald Trump. And then, of course, it speaks about Barack Obama. Now, as previously mentioned, we have the book on a strong German leader is eminent, about the Daniel 8 man. He's going to be central to the King of the North or the Holy Roman Empire. Another book on the King of the South discusses radical Islam, discusses the role that we're seeing kind of play out right now. It's very interesting to see all this in the news today. The final outcome, we know. What we're seeing today is just a prelude to other events that will take place. Of course, our founder, Herbert W. Armstrong, for decades prophesied about world events. We'll quote him later in today's program. He too was prophesied about directly in the Bible. We have a booklet. He was right. I think I moved that. Here's one. He was right. This is a great study that talks about a lot of regions around the planet, about all the prophecies that God used him to discuss. We have a lot of material from him. And of course, another very important booklet for today that I want to focus on, Vladimir Putin. He is the prophesied Prince of Russia. That's the title of the booklet. A fantastic read, and we'll quote from that a few times today. When you couple that with our other book, Russia and China in Prophecy, you get a more full picture of how God is going to use these armies from the East under the leadership of Vladimir Putin. As that booklet proves to you, he will confront Germany and Europe, the Daniel 8 man. All of these wonderful, interesting studies we encourage you to request and study. Now, some of our most responsive television programs with Gerald Flurry, his program is The Key of David. Some of the most responsive programs we've ever had were related to Vladimir Putin, the prophesied Prince of Russia. These programs were taped 8 years ago, and I just want to show you the introductory clip for part 1 of the program on the prophesied Prince of Russia.
Your Bible prophesies of a dangerous end-time leader called the Prince of Raj. He will amass an army larger than any in the history of mankind. Find out who this dominant man is and how he will affect the lives of every person on earth. Next, on The Key of David with Gerald Flurry.
You can find the back episodes of The Key of David on YouTube. We have a channel there. You can find them also on thetrumpet.com. Again, if you want to have a visual to accompany the book, watch that Key of David program. As the program points out, and as we just know from watching world events, Russia is the most dangerous, the most aggressive nuclear power in the world today. That's just a fact. They are out there moving and shaking. And the Europeans are fully aware of what the Russians are doing, more so than the Americans. Obviously, that just has to do with geography. I mean, they're next door neighbors. And conflict is raging there. The war in Ukraine, obviously, is just a meat grinder, destroying lives, destroying beautiful countryside, destroying the future. And it's just a taste of this new reality. We're seeing a new type of warfare. And yet, in so many ways, we're seeing an old type of warfare where human lives are just sacrificed without really any consideration. There was a very successful surprise attack by the Ukrainians, their drone attack against the Russian air bases, their strategic bombing fleet got a lot of attention. And it was really a tremendous success for the Ukrainians. But as several pundits pointed out, it also raised the prospect or the likelihood that attacks like that could result in a nuclear response. There has to be a lot of calculation in, attack and counterattack and where it can lead. And we've talked about it forever about, somebody taking it too far or a mistake. We are that close to the use of nuclear weapons. Mr. Armstrong wrote this in a May 1953 Good News magazine. He said, the title of the article is, "What is prophesied?" You see it on your screen there. This is May 1953. He said, "The nations of Europe, directly in the very shadow of the great Soviet menace, are disturbed." This is 1953, 75 years ago. The Europeans are disturbed, they're afraid, distrustful of America. Did you get that? Of America? Fearfully anxious for the united Europe, yet too suspicious of one another to affect this unity unless or until a supreme authority shall appear, trusted by all and with the power and leadership to unite so many nations possessing so many rival aspirations and conflicting interests. That speaks volumes to what we're living through today. Right? There is suspicion among the Europeans, one of another. Obviously, distrust with America. And again, as we've seen with NATO, I mean, there's just been the flipping and the flopping of, whether America supports it, wants to disengage, the investment, the happiness, the anger, all of that is playing out before us. And what Mr. Armstrong brought out, what the Bible teaches us, is Europe will not really congeal until they have leadership there to bring that about. But it's not just a political leader. Because they are so divided and so diverse, they also require religious unity. All of that is prophesied. So here's the irony. Europe is fearful of Russia, and for good reason, for the history that's played out there. Vladimir Putin also recognizes that a combined Europe is stronger than their American adversary. So they're going from, the risk of nuclear exchange with a nation across the world to somebody that's right there as their neighbor. I was reading about a new Russian missile that Vladimir Putin said a couple days ago. They're accelerating the production of. It's already been tested and used in Ukraine. I forget the name of the missile, but what I do remember is the launch of this missile from Moscow can hit London in less than 12 minutes. Less than 12 minutes. So you understand the fear that the Europeans have of Russia. And of course, the West possesses weapons of similar nature. And you can understand the fear of the Russians. All of it playing one against another. It's a poisonous environment. It's a diabolical evil, the likes of which we haven't seen, like the Pope said. Mr. Armstrong, the quote that I just read, again, was after World War II. It was in the early years of the Cold War. And he drew attention to something that we mention frequently, and that is, even though Europe unites, it's very unsteady. Let me quote you from that Old Testament prophet Daniel. Daniel chapter 2 says, "And as the toes of the feet were partly iron and partly clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly brittle. As you saw the iron mixed with miry clay, so will they mix with one another in marriage. But they will not hold together, just as iron does not mix with clay. And the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, nor shall its sovereignty be left to another people. It shall break in pieces all of these kingdoms, and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever. So God prophesies here what to expect this reunified Europe, as you know, because you watch our program. They are going to be an unsteady alliance, a marriage that's not really stable. The NATO summit that just concluded yesterday concluded with a pretty simple outcome. It's pretty easy to summarize what happened there. Essentially, Europe is ready to spend a lot of money to arm themselves against the threat from Russia. That's a summary of what happened yesterday. I just Googled this to give you some perspective. So this is the Google AI response. Please excuse that. But it says the European Union's gross domestic product is estimated to be $19.99 trillion nominal dollars in 2025. This represents roughly 1/6 of the global economy. The EU's GDP is second only to the United States in terms of nominal GDP and GDP based on purchasing power parity. So let's just do a little math. That's probably more than what you wanted to hear. Basically, what I wanted to draw attention to is Europe combined is an economic powerhouse. Let's do some math. If the EU, including Spain, which is balking at this, but if the EU spent 5% a year on defense, that's kind of the buzz phrase that goes around. That's what they're trying to achieve, is to get each nation of the European Union to commit 5% of their gross domestic product to defense expenditures. If they were to do that with today's GDP, that's close to $1 trillion a year spent on defense. There's also the additional provision of, I think it's 1.5% they're looking for to reinforce infrastructure to support the defense industry. So it's even beyond $1 trillion. That's the same amount as the United States spends right now. But think about this. Europe doesn't have military bases to support financially all over the world like the United States does. We have commitments all over the place that eat away at that $1 trillion that we spend, or nearly $1 trillion that we spend. The EU will be building newer weapons, more technologically advanced weapons. They will be more consolidated in their power. And as the Prime Minister mentioned, Friedrich Merz, he said that they want to learn from what's going on in the world, learn from these new normals, these new forms of warfare, and build a military machine based on that. They have the engineering and technological support to achieve what they're aiming for. They do lack some of the energy resources of Russia or the United States, but they are getting there. So let's put this in perspective now. The Europeans are looking to spend $1 trillion on defense. Last year, it is projected that Russia spent just over 15% of their GDP, so a huge portion of their GDP, 3 times what they're trying to get in Europe. But Russia doesn't have the same GDP as Europe. They spent $145 billion on defense last year. So the Europeans are looking to spend $1 trillion, and the Russians are only spending 15% of what will be available to the Europeans. It costs money to fight wars, to buy weapons. You can understand the Russian concern. That is a terrible balance, an upset imbalance. There's an article that I have here from the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. The title of the article is Unprecedented Rise in Global Military Expenditure as European and Middle East Spending Surges. This is from April of this year. I'll paraphrase it because I'm running out of time, but world military expenditure reached $2.7 trillion in 2024. $2.7 trillion of global economy is invested in fighting wars and killing people and destroying things. That's an increase of 9.4% over 2023. 10% increase in total spend. They draw attention to, as I just read, Europe because of the Ukraine war, and the Middle East because of Israel's battle against Hamas and radical Islam in Iran. They say the top 5 military spenders are the United States, China, Russia, Germany, and India. No surprise there. And they account for $1.7 trillion worth of that global spend. So almost double what the rest of the world spends. Those 5 nations. And ironically, and maybe not so much irony in this, those are the main players that the Bible speaks about. This article says over 100 countries around the world raised their military spending in 2024. We have natural disasters, or so-called natural disasters, food scarcity, population problems, and yet just about half of the world's nations are spending more on military. I could go on and on. They give you specific details about how much is being spent in Europe, in China, in India, the Middle East. Israel's military expenditure surged 65% in 2024. It's a huge increase. It's a terrible global problem. And who's going to shape the world tomorrow? Who's going to shape the future? Well, the Europeans are nicely trying to distance themselves from the United States. It's interesting to watch that separation. Really, they both need each other. The United States relies on European bases to project power across Europe, against Russia, in the Middle East. And Europe, of course, is reliant upon U.S. support. But there's no trust, or there's greatly diminished trust between Europe and America. Everybody, as I just quoted, is trying to arm themselves to be able to defend themselves, to pursue their plans individually. Another irony, we've seen this before, right? The former Soviet Empire was made up of an unsteady alliance with member states. And that alliance, that empire, crumbled because they spent too much money. They destroyed themselves by building military and empire. Think about this comment. We've quoted this in our booklets. This is from an NBC News report, April 2005. Putin says the Soviet collapse is a genuine tragedy. In his annual State of the Union address on Monday, Russian President Vladimir Putin called the collapse of the Soviet Empire, quote, the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the century. And from that time forward, again, we've quoted that before, but from that time forward, from 2005, he really accelerated his works, his efforts to reunify, to rebuild that empire. In 2008, they invaded Georgia, the nation state of Georgia, and conquered that. In October 2008, in the Philadelphia Trumpet magazine, Mr. Fleury said this. He said, Russia's attack on Georgia in August marks the beginning of a dangerous new era in history. This was the first military strike of a rising Asian superpower, and there will be more. Will the Georgia strike actually spark European unification? It started to. Will a crisis occur over Ukraine? Yeah, that's happening right now. That area is the breadbasket of Russia, and surely it is willing to wage war over that as well. Putin is rebuilding the empire with success. It's not an easy fight, but he is proving to be successful. We're seeing it happen right in front of us. His agenda to rebuild that empire is on display. I'd like to play another clip for you. Clip 7, please.
He has said that Mr. Putin has territorial ambitions beyond Ukraine. Do you view that in the same way?
Possible. I mean, it's possible. I know one thing. He'd like to settle. He'd like to get out of this thing. It's a mess for him. He called the other day. He said, can I help you with Iran? I said, no, you can help me with Russia.
That's from yesterday at the NATO summit. Again, the focus there is, there is attention drawn to the Iranian sites that were struck by the U.S. military, the ongoing war, the 12-day war with Israel. Of course, that made the news. But again, if you look just a little bit deeper below the surface, if you listen to the comments made, Russia is the concern there. The reporter asked, is it possible that Vladimir Putin has ambitions beyond Ukraine? Is it possible? And Donald Trump, said, yeah, it's possible. But then the article here in the USA Today says, well, they closed out the summit where allies identified Russia as one of the greatest threats to the security of the alliance. It's happening before us. Prophecies in Daniel, prophecies in Joel, in the book of Revelation. Other prophecies show that God is going to use the Russians. He's going to use their massive army to correct the Holy Roman Empire because they overcorrected the nations of Israel. Everything is playing out exactly as God programmed because God's trying to teach a lesson to mankind that only God can rule and bring about true peace and prosperity. Those prophecies about Russia being used in Joel, in Daniel, God calls them his army. He calls Putin's army his army, God's army. You need to prove that statement. Request our literature. There's more thorough explanation and proof. But God prophesies that his army will be used. Joel chapter 2, verse 11 says, and the Eternal shall utter his voice before his army, for his camp is very great. Speaking of the Russian army, the combined armies of the king of the east. For he is strong that executes his word. For the day of the Lord is great and very terrible, and who can abide it? God wants to know, okay, well, where is all of this leading? God is orchestrating these events. God's army is massive beyond anything we've seen today. And yet, just looking at the scale of war and the scale of population that will be at Vladimir Putin's disposal, it's not hard to calculate an army of 200 million soldiers. That's what the Bible prophesies as coming. All of the players are on the stage today. They're all cooperating one with another, just as God said would happen. And these players, these different parties, these different kings or conglomerations of power, they're already in conflict one with another. It's minor in some ways, just a minor skirmish with Ukraine or a minor interaction between the nation of Judah and the king of the south. And we know that the king of the south is going to agitate the king of the north. We see the Europeans very obviously and clearly moving to develop a tremendous new military. They're prepared to spend. That's what they just concluded yesterday. We're all in. Everybody is ready for this. It's not just individual leaders, it's nations. It is religious conflict one with another. It's economic conflict. We've never seen anything like this before. We're not talking about a 12-day war. We're not talking about a limited conflict. We're talking about spiritual aggression as played out through mankind, and it's going to lead to something terrible. Well, this is a pretty heavy subject, so maybe we'll just take a break here real quickly, and when we come back, we'll carry on with the program.
Daily news, Bible prophecy. See the connection on the Trumpet Daily. Are you feeling overwhelmed by the flood of news and information? You need something to sift the news and bring you only what matters most. You need the Trumpet Daily. You also need something to help you understand not just what's happening now, but what will happen next. You need the Trumpet Daily. Only the Trumpet Daily accurately matches daily news to precise Bible prophecies. Because Bible prophecy is the only tool up to the task of sifting the news down to what's important and showing you what will happen next. Join host Stephen Flurry every weekday. Go to trumpetdaily.com.
Well, welcome back to the program. As we showed you in the cold open, as you see on the news every night, the world knows that they're at a time of conflict. And the world just immediately rejoices at the prospect of peace. You see that especially in stock market investments or in the purchase price of gold or silver, that as the war progresses and the damage is out there for everybody to see and there's no end in sight, and then there's mention of a peace treaty, and immediately the markets rebound. Immediately there's all of this hope for peace. There are nominations for the Nobel Prize in Peace a day after bombs are dropped on a nuclear threat. It kind of makes sense because everybody wants peace. But think about what Paul warned the congregation in Thessalonica. This is from 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 3. Paul says, "For when they shall say peace and safety," like they're saying today, "then sudden destruction comes upon them as travail upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape." We just had a member in our local congregation deliver a child, and I was talking to the family just a couple days before. Everything's normal. Of course, when you're about to deliver a baby, you don't know when, but then suddenly it comes. And it's a great analogy thinking about, when we're hearing about peace and safety, then beware, as Paul said. Some of the economic data that came out this morning, again, very strong in support of some of the changing economic policies of this nation. Some maybe not as strong and supportive, but still there's all this prospect of solution, of prosperity. And God says that's when you have to be on your toes. Ceasefires are difficult to enforce, especially when you're dealing with superpowers, with ambitious world leaders. Yesterday, Mr. Stephen Flurry said, but look at some of these other hot spots. President Trump, he can't get on the phone and demand that Vladimir Putin stop firing away into Ukraine. And so he says things like he said yesterday, I had a conversation with Putin. He's a very nice guy. Earlier he said, what a fine gentleman. That's the way they talk about our adversaries. And it's true. There's that artificial hope. And of course, there's so much distrust, not only between political parties, but between nations. It's for good reason, because that kind of talk, I think everybody's come to understand, is just that. It's just talk. So about 4 weeks after we taped that first program on the Prince of Russia, which was one of our most responsive programs ever when we offered that new book, about 4 weeks later, Mr. Flurry taped a second part. We'll go ahead and just show you the intro to that program. Again, hoping to whet your appetite that you'll go watch these programs again.
Russian President Vladimir Putin is a spy by trade. United States President Donald Trump says that he'll get along with this man. Can Vladimir Putin be trusted? Could he be a dependable ally of America? Find out next on The Key of David with Gerald Flurry.
You'd think that we recorded that today based on yesterday's NATO summit, based on Donald Trump's statements about he's a gentleman, he's a nice guy. I told him not to worry about Iran, just work out your problems there. That Key of David program was taped 8 years ago. 8 years ago. Mr. Stephen Flurry said this yesterday, or he played this clip from the summit. It's very similar. We won't take a lot of time, but basically, well, I'll just say, Donald Trump asked him to do him a favor and focus on Russia. Donald Trump used the word I quite a bit. He says, we're going to talk about that. I think progress is being made. A lot of confidence, a lot of talk favors innocently naive? I don't think so, but expressing this support for our adversary. For the past decade, the United States has struggled with diplomacy, trying to calculate and combat Russian and European influence, and honestly, even Middle Eastern influence. With the Iranians, we've tried all kinds of quote-unquote diplomacy, whether it be piles of cash, sent over on a plane, on pallets, there's that much cash. Or maybe we make empty threats. Well, if you cross this red line, you better watch out. Or the famous don't. That's our diplomacy. Our president, our vice president just say, don't. And they did, of course, and then nothing happened. How do we combat this? Well, the United States has been betraying our allies in Europe and Israel. We've been arming the Ukrainians and then denying weapons. We've given them blankets. We've also given them billions of dollars. We've called our friends nice. Our adversaries, we ask to do us a favor. How has that worked out? Mankind's struggling to put the pieces together. From that booklet, The Prophesied Prince of Russia, that is all about Vladimir Putin, it says the West has mostly been silent about the depth of this man's evil. Under his rule, Russia has become the world's most dangerous superpower at this time. America's military might is shrinking fast, and its will is completely broken. That is factual. Sure, there's going to be an occasional success, maybe several successes, but overall, would you say that the United States military is confident, never loses? I mean, look at the last few decades. You understand why our quote-unquote allies are fearful about how we'll respond, if we'll respond. Vladimir Putin, you might recall, is a trained KGB spy. He worked for the KGB for 16 years. As our booklet points out, the Washington Post ran a profile piece on Vladimir Putin in January 2016. And they just chronicle his pathway into becoming the president of Russia. And they talk about his training in the KGB and how, as you would expect, it trained him to be crafty and deceptive, ruthless. And that's Vladimir Putin. That's the nice guy, right? That's the guy that we're asking to do us a favor. Now, sadly, it seems that some of our diplomatic efforts have bought into some of that narrative. Vanity. Vanity can really blind a person to the reality. And I think that's the case here. That Post article says the death of a former KGB operative is a reminder of Vladimir Putin's past life as a spy. The article says, as a street fighting kid growing up in crowded apartment complexes in the Soviet Union, Vladimir Putin dreamed of something bigger. By the time he was a teenager, that something, he concluded, was becoming a spy. Even before I finished high school, I wanted to work in the intelligence community, Putin said. The United States might be ignorant to that background, just willing to put it behind and forgiving. Europe is not. Europe is concerned. In The Prophesied Prince of Russia, our booklet says the Ukrainian crisis continues and America is sleeping through it. But Europe is deeply alarmed. The changes this crisis provokes in Germany and Europe will shake the nations. There's a book that I wanted to quote. I don't have time right now. I'm sure I'll use it at some point in the future. The title of the book is Communism, Democracy, and Catholic Power. It was written in 1951. And that book basically says that America has a habit, a reputation of trusting its adversaries, naively trusting only to complicate matters further, trusting them, helping them, only to find out that that relationship is not reciprocal, that it comes as a disadvantage to us. That's a lesson we've failed to learn. So Mr. Armstrong, in 1952, wrote an article in the Plain Truth magazine, and this is just more indication of what we need to keep our eyes on. He said, meanwhile, when Asia falls completely to the communists, as it will, the U.S. and Europe will then be really up against it. Russia will have conquered and sit governing more than half of the population of the world. The Soviet army will then be much bigger. And the most significant effect of this will be the fear it will throw into Europe. A fear that will complete the uniting of the prophesied 10 European dictatorships into one huge reunited, resurrected, Holy Roman Empire. When you see cooperation between the Chinese, the North Koreans, and Russia, be aware. The North Koreans are providing troops. You see, additional cooperation. You start to see conflict between Pakistan and India, Japan, Taiwan. They're going to be learning some lessons about the United States and how dependable we are. They're going to be left without option. Vladimir Putin is prophesied to rule over close to half, or maybe more than half of the world's population. That's quite a prospect that should be feared. That's where we're heading. It seems so obvious when you watch world news. These prophecies about world leaders, they're just spot on. And ironically, as we point out all the time, that turns out to be good news, because we are approaching the end of these last days, days that made the prophet Daniel sick. But the end of those days starts that wonderful world tomorrow that I mentioned earlier, with the reign of Jesus Christ, the restoration of true theocracy, finally a chance for peace and prosperity and freedom for everybody. I had a lot more to share with you, but in the lead up to the return of Jesus Christ, with all of this warfare happening, Christ brings an end to it. And you would think that brings an end to the rebellion of mankind, but it doesn't. And this is the bait that I'm trying to set for you, to request these booklets, to read and study them. Do you remember Ezekiel 38 and 39? It prophesies there that a couple of years after Jesus Christ returns, that there will once again be an attack from a Russian-led power, smaller army than what happened, or than participated in the tribulation, the day of the Lord, but still a huge army. And they will come once again against Israel, against Jesus Christ, and they will meet their end. God's path to bringing peace and prosperity is generally not what you'd expect. There are plenty of pundits out there, some very intelligent people that remember history, that prognosticate about the future, but they don't have the confidence that we have. We have the more sure word of Bible prophecy, and we rely on that heavily. Heavily. Have you studied that prophecy in Ezekiel 38 and 39? It's explained in both those booklets, the Russia and China in Prophecy and the Prophesied Prince of Russia. Again, I encourage you to read those books. So let me just close by saying, if you love prophecy, if you love history, watching world events, then you're right where you need to be. Focused on the Trumpet Daily, focused on the Key of David program, reading the materials that we offer you. Again, we want you to request them. We want you to study them. So stay focused on what we offer. Engage yourself. Study this so you know what's coming. Well, thank you for watching the program today. Be on the lookout for Mr. Fleury from Britain, and then hopefully programs from Israel. So thanks for tuning in today, and we'll talk to you next time.